On August 7th, something terrible began in Moscow as well.
Just film this.
Oh God.
Residential complex, heart of the capital. It might go gray.
There was such an explosion here just now. Oh my gosh. Wow, unbelievable. The asphalt just cracked here.
The GUR carried out a brilliant special operation in Moscow, the Moscow region, St. Petersburg, and Kaliningrad.
In short, something just exploded. The vibration was just like from a drone. Everyone woke up. Right now, we don't even know which tower got hit. A drone? Yeah, it almost reached us.
The Kremlin is in a panic. Putin convened the Security Council.
The blast was so strong it just blew the clothes right off. I was in shock. I had no thoughts at that moment. I immediately ducked down because I realized something had hit.
Drones are flying above me, right at me. Something's flying in. Hear it? There's a drone somewhere over there. Look, look, look.
The Ukrainian armed forces are attacking the enemy's tactical and strategic aviation at the airfield in the Voronezh region, a drone manufacturing plant in Tatarstan. And they're carrying out the air defense system in occupied Crimea feet first.
That's nuts.
Moscow City is being evacuated.
In short, something just exploded.
And the US has authorized strikes on Moscow, St. Petersburg, and the Kremlin.
Ah, I told you so.
President Trump is openly suggesting that Zelensky strike Moscow and St. Petersburg. These missiles are already on their way. Jassms and Tomahawks are capable of hitting targets in the very center of Mordor's capital. Amid drone strikes, there is an evacuation from Moscow City. People are being sent to work remotely en masse in Russian companies. Sobyanin is shooting down drones with his bare hands. There is an aviation collapse at Moscow and St. Petersburg airports. There's panic and evacuation there. All of this is a new phase of the war and the end of the Kremlin's illusions. Today we are discussing this with Ruslan Kutaev, President of the Assembly of the Peoples of the Caucasus. This video is about fear, the fear of Moscow, the fear of the Kremlin, and the fear of everyone who realizes that now anything is truly possible. For the first time during the war, a direct statement was made. Moscow could be struck if the US provides missiles. And we're not just talking about the American Jassms, which have a range of over 1,000 kilometers, but above all about Tomahawks, long-range systems capable of striking at the very heart of Mordor's capital. That's exactly why there's an evacuation from Moscow City. Employees are being asked to work remotely. The Kremlin is trembling not because of words, but because of signals. And today, those signals are sounding very loud. What happens next? Let's discuss this with Ruslan Kutaev, who knows firsthand what pressure on the elites and fear at the top are like.
Dasha, greetings to you. Greetings to our esteemed viewers.
Ruslan Kamitik, what do you think about the evacuation of Moscow City? What do you think about the huge number of employees being sent to work remotely so they don't get hit, so the center doesn't get hit, so they don't get caught in the crossfire?
We should explain a little to our viewers. The thing is, the Russian special services placed UAV operators in those office centers who were preparing there, and all those bots were being prepared there, the ones who spread and continue to spread information. This is the troll factory that Prigozhin created in St. Petersburg. The entire operation was relocated, transferred to Moscow. And so these were mainly the people who spread lies, who slandered Ukraine and the entire civilized world. Of course, they got scared. Frankly speaking, yes, that's right, Dasha, you're giving the correct information. Some of them, about 20%, have been left behind. And even then, they will only be there during the daytime. As a rule, Ukrainian drones arrive at night. We should tell our viewers that they operate around the clock. In other words, they spread their nonsense, this criminal, false information, 24 hours a day. And naturally, they also operate around the clock in the direction of Russian drones, Russian UAVs. Well, you see, now both Budanov and Malyuk have significantly adjusted their operational work schedule. They've effectively put many of their personnel on a much more flexible, let's say, time regime This allows them to practice their specialized craft at home or in various other suitable locations, providing them with greater autonomy and efficiency in their tasks.
Friends, please like this video and leave a few kind words for our duo. Ruslan Kutaev and I go live several times a week to discuss current events. Right now, the main question is, how will Moscow respond to Tomahawks, Jassms, and other missiles and drones that will be heading toward Moscow and St. Petersburg? Daily drone attacks, the carpet plan in Moscow and St. Petersburg airports, and the fact that the aviation industry has simply lost billions of rubles. Ruslan Kutaev, how do you feel about the ongoing drone attacks on Moscow and St. Petersburg, and about the constant aviation collapse at Pulkovo, Vnukovo, and Sheremetyevo airports? They sleep on the floor for days, suffer huge economic losses, and even as a consequence, despite the underlying corruption, ultimately, the former Minister of Transport died, whether by natural causes or not. What do you think?
Well, to be honest, it's a circus. When you look at the scenes of Moscow airports being overcrowded with people packed together like sardines in a can, literally pressed up against each other, and all this goes on not just for a day or two, but sometimes for several days in a row. And when this continues for weeks on end, it brings a lot of satisfaction. And of course, here we are complimentary towards the behavior of the Ukrainian side, the armed forces of Ukraine, and the Ukrainian special services, because in Moscow, Muscovites, Russians, they should find themselves in the same situation that Ukraine and Ukrainians have been in for 3.5 years, being constantly shelled, shot at, and killed around the clock. This should increase. We know that there are all the prerequisites for this to increase. And indeed, what Trump said has become public knowledge. To be honest, I carefully analyzed their behavior. For a day, a little more than a day, they were just, completely stunned. They truly didn't know how to properly behave. They were all just completely deflated, these propagandists and the rest of them, until some clear directive eventually came from Kirienko's administration about precisely what to do next. And they adopted the stance of simply ignoring what Trump said and decided to keep acting as before. Both the military and political leadership confirmed this. We know they continue to use everything in their arsenal to attack Ukraine, Kiev, and Ukrainian cities. So that's the position they've taken. But we know 50 days is really a long time. It's a long time, especially for those who are being attacked, who are under assault by Russian terrorists. And that's why they're now pressuring Trump, blackmailing Putin, pushing him. That's the kind of game they're playing with him. But unfortunately, this game ends up hurting innocent people in Ukraine. Well, let's hope that from this situation too, without a doubt, of course, I have no doubt that Ukrainians will come out of all this with dignity. For now, it's hard to say what kind of decision the American or Russian side will make regarding how they will act. They will keep playing. But there is one thing we know for sure. The crucial point here is that this particular negotiator, who is known to be quite close to former President Donald Trump, is named Kirill. I'm struggling to recall his full last name at this moment, but he is a significant figure in these discussions. More precisely, Dmitry Kirillov. He immediately made a statement after Trump acted rather toughly, saying that the Russian side understands Trump, understands the Americans, and that we accordingly will act in accordance with the current situation. And he says that he is full of hope that America and Russia will still come to an agreement and that they will achieve peace. So at this point, I wouldn't venture to make any predictions. It's a very unclear matter. It's unlikely that any expert could do it because Trump's behavior is unpredictable. Putin actually believes that he caught Trump like a goldfish on a hook a long time ago, and basically all this time he's been manipulating him however he wants. Let's be honest, he controls and twists Trump any way he likes. Whatever Putin does, Trump, on the contrary, goes along with him and keeps doing so. But now there's a pause. Let's hope, as he promised, that the defensive weapons, specifically those Patriots he promised, will be delivered to Ukraine. And let's not forget the missiles he talked about with their long range. Trump himself suggested, no matter what he says now, he told Zelensky, Volodya, why don't you bomb St. Petersburg and Moscow? Probably because he was in a fit of anger at Putin. I think the situation will continue to escalate. I think it will be interesting, not because Russia will escalate, but because Ukraine will respond. Every day we see new technologies. Dasha, you and I have always talked about this. The new technologies that Ukraine is developing and that the West and the United States are supplying to Ukraine give us every reason to hope that we are indeed moving toward victory. As for the tragic death of the Minister of Transport, my firmly formed opinion and considered view is that this was a demonstrative, symbolic, and indeed a very deliberate killing. It's a reminder to the other members of the government, to the governors, to those people whom Putin, for the past 25 years, has allowed to do whatever they want, to steal and act without any limits. He most likely gave them a signal, told them or passed on the message, or maybe said it himself that today money is needed and money really is needed. Putin doesn't have the money even to finance the front today. Everything has failed, everything has failed. They thought they could hold out until the very end, let's say, until the money ran out, but there is no money. And now they have to invent and come up with something. I think we will still witness someone trying to escape, someone will run away, someone will be killed. The infighting has already started, let's say, among the second tier. It hasn't reached the first tier yet, not Kirienko, not Patrushev, not Bortnikov, but the second tier is made up of ministers and governors. I think the infighting with them has already begun, and they've already started to deal with them quite specifically, and they're being shaken up, I think, quite thoroughly.
Ruslan Kutaev Senator Lindsey Graham's statement was very telling when he said, "I would suggest asking Ayatollah Khomeini what will happen." Thus, Lindsey Graham is hinting that America, certainly not by its own hands, but most likely through the actions of the Ukrainian armed forces, will be able to attack targets that are close to Russia's nuclear triad. We're not necessarily talking about launches right now, we're talking about fleets, right? There's the Northern Fleet, the Pacific Fleet, nuclear facilities in Crimea. So, for example, I analyzed that there are nuclear facilities and infrastructure in occupied Crimea, like Feodosia, which has a radioactive waste storage site, Sevastopol, which is a base for nuclear submarines, and now Novorossiysk. In that case, Novorossiysk could be targeted as well. There's also Kazachia Bay, a restricted area, Balaklava, which used to be a base for nuclear submarines with nuclear warheads, and the airfields at Gvardeyskoye and Saki, from which enemy strategic aviation can take off. So essentially, you could say that America, in the person of Lindsey Graham, hinted to Putin that his nuclear triad could be attacked on the 51st or 52nd day. What do you think about that?
It could be anything. Web 2, Web 3. Ukraine has these capabilities. But the most important thing here is something else. I want to draw our viewers' attention to this. Very few people have actually thought about this. At one time, Trump warned Iran and said 50, 60 days. I'm giving you 60 days to resolve this issue, this disputed issue. And the attack by Israel was carried out precisely on the 61st day. In other words, Trump stuck to the 60-day period despite his, let's say, lack of seriousness on many issues, at least in this case, regarding the deadline set for Iran. Trump held firm, and most importantly, he did it successfully. The Americans attacked the nuclear facilities and nothing happened to them. Trump is triumphant. Trump announces to the whole world that he has won. He stopped the nuke, stopped it or not, that's another question. But the most important thing is Trump did it and he succeeded. Now, being, let's say, on this significant and well-earned note of victory, stemming directly from the successful achievement of the previous deadline he meticulously set, he is currently exhibiting a very strong and unwavering sense of determination. And here, Dasha, you were right. This is not a case where American aircraft will come and bomb some Russian targets. No, it will be the glorious Ukrainian army that does this. It will be the glorious Ukrainian special services. We don't know how they'll do it, but we know that they will. That's the key point. We know that Ukraine will do it. And most importantly, both Russia and Putin know that Ukraine is capable of doing this, especially if there is support from the United States of America, and even more so if there is a need to fulfill Trump's promise. In that case, America will show some initiative and will almost certainly supply some kind of weaponry that hasn't been used before. So our expectations are very good, truly promising and positive expectations.
Ruslan Kutaev, Zelensky has stated that he is discussing a mega deal on arms sales with Trump. In an interview with The Post, Volodymyr Zelensky said that his last conversation with Trump was about an agreement under which the US and Ukraine would support each other in the development of aerospace technologies. And the parties are discussing a deal that involves purchasing American weapons in exchange for selling Ukrainian drones. This is a mega deal. We, the American people, need these technologies. They should be in your arsenal. I think this is a mega deal, as they say, a win-win situation for both sides, President Zelensky stated. And what does this mean in practice, Ruslan Kutaev?
In practice, this means that the Ukrainians have advanced further than anyone else, Israel, the United States of America, China, in the field of drone development and unmanned aerial vehicle engineering. In fact, Ukraine has always been at the forefront during the Soviet Union era as well when it comes to military and engineering thought. It's no coincidence that shipbuilding, engines, and this engine manufacturing plant are all in Mykolaiv. That says a lot. These are highly skilled and top-class specialists. Unfortunately, due to well-known events and reasons, Ukraine, for a time in the 1990s, slowed down its economic development, its engineering thought, and the emergence of new ideas and technologies. But now there's a breakthrough, and we can say that with confidence. And that's why I actually like Zelensky's approach in this regard. Lately, Ukraine isn't so much asking for weapons as they are asking for technology and joint ventures to produce military products, military equipment, ammunition, and so on. That is what tomorrow, the future, is all about. And now the Americans are realizing and understanding that Ukraine has excellent engineering talent, which is in no way inferior to that of Israel, China, or the United States. And that's why the Americans themselves are now offering Ukraine the opportunity to work together. And all of this should yield very good results. And so we can only welcome this, and we are glad that this movement is happening in exactly this direction.
Ruslan Kutaev, now let's talk about the Senate. We see that the Senate was ready to impose sanctions by the end of July, but due to Trump's negative stance, this was postponed until September. Ruslan Kutaev, do you think that Trump gave Putin the opportunity to launch a large-scale offensive during these 50 days? Because there is already information reported by all the world's media that Putin is preparing 160,000 Russian troops to advance to start a new wave of offensive actions on Ukrainian territory. He will do this in the next 50 days. Perhaps this was indeed a deal between Trump and Putin. So in this way, did Trump allow Putin to occupy for the next 50 days?
You know, Dasha, I don't want to deceive myself. I equally admit that Trump could have done this, Trump could have done this. I'm not insisting on it, but I allow that it could have happened. They could, in principle, have come to an agreement. And Putin says to him, well, give me 30 days. Trump says, I'll give you 50 days. Here are 50 days and settle all your issues. Basically, it could have happened that way, but it could also have been different. In the end, Trump's entourage, who, by the way, is incredibly self-absorbed, they love him to an unbelievable degree, say to Trump, they're mocking you. The Russians are mocking you on their propaganda shows. They're dragging you through the mud like some country bumpkin, and Putin manipulates you however he wants. And that's probably why he got angry here. So here, both options have a right to exist. But to rule out the possibility that Trump could have made this deal with Putin, like, all right, I'll give you this last term, these 50 days, go ahead, try and see what you can do. Well, you can't. If we consider these two options right now, I'm still inclined to think that's not the case, that it's not so. Because for the first time, notice, Dasha, for the first time, Trump, he used to refuse to sell weapons to Ukraine. The Europeans had long been suggesting, sell to us. There's another very important detail. None of the experts, for some reason, mention this. Trump didn't even allow for the possibility that any kind of support, any kind of assistance could exist through other countries, through NATO. Previously, everything was arranged through European countries, that is, through the EU. But now, in the latest decision, Trump says, through NATO countries. This is also a breakthrough indicating that Trump has changed his mind. At the very least, he is now willing to sell weapons. That's exactly what we need. Europe has collectively gathered 800 billion euros in order to successfully arm itself as well. And joint ventures for the production of weapons, the modernization of existing ones, and supplying Ukraine with the necessary quantity and proper quality. And that's why, in this case, I still lean toward this. Trump is offended by Putin, and that's why he acts this way. But at the same time, I also acknowledge the validity of this, let's say, this position that they could have come to an agreement. You can expect anything from Trump, and you always have to keep your guard up with him.
Ruslan Kutaev. Now let's move on to two important topics. This is the 18th package of sanctions, but we'll save that for the end. And now there are the so-called hellish sanctions against Russia, which the Senate may vote on in September. 100% tariffs for countries that continue to buy energy resources from Russia. So just yesterday, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte warned that countries like Brazil, China, and India could suffer greatly from secondary sanctions if they continue to do business with Russia. And here is the news. India is confident that it will find an alternative to Russian oil in the event of US sanctions. This was stated by Oil Minister Hardeep Singh Puri, according to Reuters. Ruslan Kutaev, so we understand that as soon as the Senate imposes secondary sanctions against countries that buy Russian energy resources, India and other countries doing business with Russia will abruptly stop. And the head of the president's office, Andriy Yermak, has already stated that if the Senate imposes sanctions in September this year, the war could end this year. And now the main question, Ruslan Kutaev, will the Senate impose these sanctions?
That really is the main question. It all depends. It all depends on Trump's behavior. I want our viewers to understand the Republicans, both congressmen and senators, are tied to Trump, much to their regret. Even the Reaganite wing is tied to Trump. If they openly go against Trump, then they face a serious risk of not being reelected to their chambers, the upper and lower houses of the United States Congress. It is purely out of self-interest to ensure they are re-elected to both the Senate and Congress that they behave this way. We know that even the vast majority of Republican senators and congressmen hold a pro-Ukrainian position. Even MAGA, the political platform, the very foundation of Donald Trump's movement, went directly against him. And here we can safely and confidently count on this, let's say, their current significant ideological split. We're certainly not going to delve deeply into that, the Epstein scandal, their various behaviors, and all of that, let's say. Well, we truly don't need to discuss such matters in our program today. With children, specifically regarding pedophilia, and so on, these are extremely sensitive and critical topics. I think we won't get into that. But Trump's situation is complicated. So it could turn out that Trump's position will become so weak that he won't be the one setting the tone, but rather the congressmen and senators will. I assure you, if things turn out that way, they will support these sanctions without batting an eye. And of course, they will go for it with great enthusiasm and eagerness. 85 out of 100 people, Congress, senators of the United States of America, openly say they are in favor of imposing these sanctions. And here you were right to say India will immediately get off the hook. Don't think so. I'm convinced China won't buy Russian oil for Russia's sake, only to then end up facing, let's say, sanctions restrictions, and especially oil. They already have it. I want to point out, China buys 70% of Iran's oil. China has a choice to bail out Russia or to put itself at risk. China won't do that. So, and Brazil, why would Brazil need this when Venezuelan oil is right at hand, and so on. So, in this way, we can confidently say that if these sanctions are imposed, this last source of income, the funding for the war, without exaggeration, well, I won't say it will be completely cut off, but it will be very seriously limited. And in that case, the economy, which is already collapsed and at rock bottom, will fall apart even further. Pensions will stop being paid, student stipends will end, and so on. And all of this will quickly escalate and spill over to the front lines when there will be absolutely nothing to pay those they've now forced onto the front.
It might turn out that August, a month that has always been difficult for the Russian Empire, I call this country.
Historically, yes.
Yes. And for example, if sanctions are imposed, the Senate will impose sanctions. Well, basically, everything will collapse. What do you think?
You know, Dasha, I think it's not so much, although Fico and Orban are playing their Judas roles here, especially Orban, he's really going out of his way to help Russia and trip up Ukraine. He harbors such hatred toward Ukraine and Ukrainians. I think it will definitely come back to him 100-fold. So I think that ultimately, the behavior of these two, Orban is definitely connected with Trump. It's Trump's attitude. I think it was Trump who pressured the Europeans and prevented these sanctions from being imposed. We remember the last time they met, and it was right before this. And in fact, that's why Europe postponed things until after the meeting when they were at the G7 or G8 summit. They met there, and here Trump really expressed his wishes, and he openly imposed his attitude on Europe. I think that this will also pass. And if it aligns with Trump's current mood, whatever it may be today, and eventually he stops looking back at Putin and Russia, then these sanctions will go through. I'm sure, for some reason, I'm always convinced that the Europeans will find an approach to these two European troublemakers who are stirring things up. Remember when Europe wanted to adopt yet another round of sanctions, Orban was getting in the way, and then the former Chancellor of Germany asked him, "Go take a walk to the restroom." And in his absence, since you can vote when someone is absent, they voted and passed it. They can do exactly the same thing now. Merz right now can not only send him to the restroom, he can send him anywhere he wants. This guy is very determined in his support for Ukraine. And that's why I still think the main reason lies with America and Trump. And I still believe and am convinced that in the end, of course, Europe will adopt these sanctions. I think these sanctions are close. And as for the procedure for bypassing the mood of these two gentlemen, if you can even call them that, Pfizer and Orban, they will find a way and there will still be progress. I have no doubt that both America and Europe will adopt them and everything will move forward. There's really no doubt about it because, well, historically, the situation is such that America is destined to, there's no way it can run away from Ukraine. Even if Trump tries to run away, I've always said this a year ago before he came and after he came, I've said if he runs away, he'll end up running back to Zelensky and asking to come back because his political future and that of the Republicans is tied to Ukraine and to Ukraine's victory. And that's why Ukraine isn't asking for anything. They're simply saying, sell us weapons, we'll develop your weapons, we'll improve them technologically. Today we see Trump making an offer to Zelensky about what they've improved. Let's share technologies. That's the truth, that's the reality of life, and neither Trump nor Zelensky nor anyone else can escape it.
Dear audience, Ruslan Kutaev and I work for you several times a week, so every like, every comment, and every subscription is priceless to us. Please like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. I give likes and hearts to the geography of our viewers. Thank you so much. President of the Assembly of the Peoples of the Caucasus, Ruslan Kutaev, Ruslan Kutaev, thank you. And as always, see you next week.
All the best, take care, and see you next time.